Israel. Trust me, this is gonna break your heart. This is going to break you down. 'Cause you're on your way to Babylon. No one's gonna let you come in. Doors are fastened, windows are pinned. Keep your hands on that plow. Hey, I said hold on to Israel. Don't you look back to Jerusalem no more. Keep your hands on the plow. You're in your enemy's land now. Move that hill and take off the ground. Hold on to your soul, just like Jeremiah prophesied. Hold on to Israel. Jesus coming back to receive us, take us back home. Hold on to your soul. He's coming back soon.
Why are so many of us in jail? Why are we always impoverished? Why are we in bad living conditions? Why are we the highest unemployed in the whole country? Nobody ever asked the question.
All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the origins and like the whole historical journey of the Israelites.
Oh, yeah, this could be fascinating.
I think so too. It's like, you know how you're always super into history?
Always.
Well, today's episode is like tailor-made. We're going to try and understand like the origins and the experiences of Black people through history, but with a specific focus on the Israelites.
Mm-hmm.
And get this. Our main sources are some excerpts from documents put together by Cherise and Bridget. These two, they're from this group called the Israel of God.
Okay.
And they've got some, let me tell you, really unique takes on like biblical events and stuff. We're talking unpacking the entire lineage of the Israelites.
Wow.
Tracing their roots all the way back to Africa. And then we're going to examine how they interacted with other groups too. Like, you won't believe some of the connections to Egyptians and Ethiopians that we're going to uncover. Seriously. And hold on, there's even a theory about this huge event that happened in 70 AD that apparently, like, totally changed the course of history for the Israelites. Forever.
I had no idea. So what are we waiting for? Let's get into it.
I am so ready. What I find super interesting about these documents is how they flip the script on like everything we think we know about identity and heritage, you know?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to Black history.
Absolutely. It makes you stop and really think about like who gets to tell the story.
Exactly.
And how those narratives get shaped over time. You know, like whose version of history are we actually learning?
It's like we're about to like crack open some kind of historical mystery novel or something.
I love that.
So to get us started, let's go back to basics. Lineage.
Okay.
The documents rely a lot on, you know, the book of Genesis. Specifically, the stories about Noah's sons and who they're supposed to have fathered. Like, have you ever heard of this whole breakdown before?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's a pretty familiar story. But these documents, they have like a really specific interpretation.
Yeah.
Yeah, they say Japheth, he was the father of the Gentiles.
Okay.
And they describe the Gentiles as being like Europeans, white people, basically.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and then there's Ham. They say he was the father of, well, a bunch of different Black peoples, including like Ethiopians, Egyptians, and Nubians.
Okay.
And then, of course, we've got Shem, who is said to have fathered the Shemites,
Right.
including the Israelites, Ishmaelites, Edomites, and Midianites.
Wow. So it's like we got this giant family tree branching out from Noah.
Yeah.
And these sources, they're really emphasizing that all these groups, all of them, started in Africa. Like they're drawing a direct line from Blackness to these really ancient lineages, which I think is a pretty powerful statement.
It is. It really makes you rethink how we see these ancient civilizations, Like take Egypt, for example. We often hear about Egypt, but don't always consider that, like, the people who actually built the pyramids might have been black.
Yeah, exactly. Like these documents are suggesting that.
Yeah.
And it just makes you wonder how much of what we think we know about those ancient cultures has been influenced by, I don't know, like later interpretation.
Yeah, for sure.
Or even like biases that crept in over time.
It definitely makes you question things.
It really does. Now, since we're talking ancient Egypt, let's shift gears a little and focus on someone whose story is like super connected to that place. Joseph.
Oh, right. Joseph, he's a key figure, the first Israelite to be sold into slavery, right?
Exactly. And his story, if you look at the book of Genesis, it's like really important for understanding some of the kind of repeating themes we see in Israelite history.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, first of all, his initial enslavement, it wasn't even by Egyptians. It was by, get this, Ishmaelites, who we know today as Arabs.
Huh. Okay.
And then they're the ones who sold him to the Egyptians.
Wow. I haven't really thought about it that way.
Yeah, and the sources interpret this whole thing as like almost a foreshadowing of what Israelites would face later on.
You mean like hardship and captivity?
Uh-huh. At the hands of other groups they're actually related to ancestrally.
Wow.
Which, if you think about it, is something that keeps happening in these documents.
Huh, yeah.
But there's also this part of Joseph's story that people often kind of gloss over.
What's that?
His rise to power in Egypt. He becomes like second in command to the pharaoh.
That's right. I forgot about that.
And here's another detail that's really interesting. His wife, she was Egyptian.
Okay.
Meaning his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, they were actually of mixed heritage.
So it challenges that whole idea of these ancient groups being totally separate, right?
Totally. Even way back then, identities were fluid and, like, complex. This whole idea of pure lineages, it kind of falls apart with Joseph's story alone.
Yeah, for sure. It really highlights how much cultural blending and interconnection was happening, even in ancient times.
Totally. Okay, now if we follow the timeline a bit further, we get to a period that was, well, incredibly tough for the Israelites, their enslavement in Egypt.
Right. I think this is the part of the story a lot of people might be more familiar with.
Probably. So the book of Exodus, it describes this time under a new pharaoh, one who, as the text says, knew not Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
And the Israelites, they faced brutal conditions, including like that horrible order to kill all the male babies.
It's hard to even imagine.
It's awful. And these documents, they see this event as like a direct result of the Israelites not following God's laws.
As a punishment, almost.
Yeah, like a turning point. And it's during this time, in the middle of all this suffering, that Moses comes onto the scene.
Right. Talk about a story of resilience and divine intervention, all rolled into one.
Absolutely. The sources talk about his, like, miraculous escape from death as a baby.
Yeah.
And how he was raised in the Pharaoh's house, and then eventually his destiny to lead the Israelites out of slavery. It's pretty epic.
Definitely. And they portray the Exodus as like a foundational narrative of liberation, of never giving up.
For sure. Speaking of turning points, though, these documents say there's another one that happens later on that's just as important. The destruction of Jerusalem.
Oh, right, in 70 A.D. by Titus and the Romans.
Exactly. They say this event is a massive turning point for Israelite history.
It scattered them everywhere, right?
All over the place, across the Mediterranean, Europe, even deeper into Africa. And because of that, a lot of Israelites lost their identity.
And they forgot their role as priests of God, as the documents put it.
Yeah, can you maybe explain that a bit more? Like, what did that role actually mean, and why was it such a big deal?
Sure. So this idea of priests of God, it's like the core of how they interpret what it means to be an Israelite.
Okay.
They believe that Israelites were chosen by God to be like intermediaries between him and everyone else, to uphold his laws and, guide people towards being righteous.
So their whole purpose was tied to that.
In a way, yeah, like their connection to God was super important. So when they were scattered and so many lost their sense of who they were, it wasn't just about being physically displaced,
Yeah.
It was a spiritual crisis. Like they lost sight of the purpose they believed God had given them. At least that's how these sources frame it.
So it's like they're saying it was way more than just being forced to move somewhere new.
Exactly. And they take it a step further, actually.
Oh.
They argue that because of this void, this absence of Israelites as priests of God, it allowed something else to come in and try to take over that role.
What do you mean?
The Catholic Church.
Hold on. Are they saying that the Catholic Church, like, intentionally stepped into this void? Or is it more about, like, historical circumstance, What are they getting at?
It's not totally clear what their intentions are, but they do point to certain historical events, like, for example, the Inquisition.
That was a pretty dark time.
It was, and they see that as evidence of an attempt to, well, eliminate anyone who didn't follow the church's teachings.
Okay.
And they say that some of the people who were persecuted during that time were the original Christians, who they believe were actually Israelites.
Wait, hold on. They're saying Israelites were the first Christians?
That's their interpretation, yeah.
Whoa, this is making me rethink everything I thought I knew.
It's a lot to take in.
For sure. And it leads to another really interesting claim they make, which is that a lot of what people think about Israelites today, it's just wrong.
Like a misinterpretation.
Exactly.
Okay, so what kind of misinterpretations are we talking about?
Buckle up. We're getting to some really interesting stuff next. Okay, so we're back and ready to get into those misinterpretations you mentioned before. It sounds like these documents are like really challenging some pretty big ideas, you know?
They are like really fundamental stuff about who Israelites are and how they fit into the whole picture of history.
So where do we even start?
Well, how about with their claim that people who call themselves Jews today,
Mm-hmm.
they're not actually the true Israelites?
Whoa, okay, that's a pretty huge statement. So they're saying the very people who are most associated with the word Jew, they're not actually Israelites.
That's what they're arguing. They trace it back to the Edomites.
Edomites, okay. Remind me who they are again?
The descendants of Esau.
Right, okay.
And their interpretation is that eventually the Edomites converted to Judaism, and then, well, over time, they kind of took over the identity of the Israelites.
So it's like they're saying there was this historical switcheroo. One group just like adopted the mantle of another. Is that what they're saying?
Kinda, yeah. And for evidence, they point to things like the Maccabean Revolt. Do you remember that?
Vaguely. Refresh my memory.
Okay, so it was this Jewish uprising against the Seleucid Empire back in the 2nd century BC. And they argue that like that event was a big turning point in how Jewish identity developed.
Okay, but I got to say, this history of Jewish identity, it's complicated.
Oh, for sure. It goes back like thousands of years. And their take is just one perspective, you know. There are many others out there.
Right. Okay. But it's interesting, isn't it, how these documents, they kind of blend like biblical stories with historical events and then their own like theological interpretations, you know.
It's fascinating.
To come to these conclusions, it really gets you thinking about how like different points of view can lead to such wildly different ways of understanding history.
Absolutely. And this whole idea of misinterpretations, it also applies to what they say about the people who live in Palestine today.
Oh, really? What do they say about that?
Well, they say that most of the folks living there now are actually Arabs who moved to the region later on. Not the original black inhabitants.
Okay. I got to say that's a potentially kind of controversial thing to claim, you know.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Especially with everything going on over there, it's a really sensitive topic.
Right. So what's their like basis for saying that?
Well, they believe that the original people who lived there were descendants of Canaan.
Okay.
And they say Canaan and his people were black.
So in their view, the real Palestinians, quote unquote, are black.
That's how they see it. But again, it's important to remember they're coming at this from a specific angle. Their understanding of biblical lineage and how that plays out through history.
Yeah, okay.
It's a good reminder that history is messy. Different groups claim ownership over the past, and they use those claims to support their identities and their goals for the future.
For sure.
And it makes you think about how often history is written by the winners, right?
Yeah.
And the voices of people who've been marginalized, their stories get silenced or twisted over time.
Yeah. Which actually brings us to their last misinterpretation, I guess we could call it. Their claim about modern day Egyptians.
Oh, right.
They say that they aren't actually descended from the ancient Egyptians. Seriously, what makes them say that? Like, what's their reasoning there?
Well, they point out that a lot of the Egyptian population today, they're Arab. They came to the area later after the Islamic conquest back in the 7th century.
Okay.
And they believe that the original Egyptians, the ones who built the pyramids and all of that, they were black, who they call Nubians.
I mean, it is interesting to think about how much of what we think we know about different groups has been like filtered through our own cultural lens.
Absolutely.
And
the dominant narratives we've been taught.
Yeah. This whole deep dive is seriously making me question everything.
That's a good thing. It's about opening your mind to different possibilities, to different interpretations of the past.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about like the lineage of the Israelites, their time in Egypt, the scattering of the priests, and all these different ideas about identity that they're like challenging.
A lot of ground covered, yeah.
it feels like all these different pieces are starting to connect. We're like weaving together this really complex and nuanced tapestry of Israelite history.
I like that. It's not just a straight line, right? It's this tapestry with threads of faith and lineage and migration and cultural exchange all mixed together.
Totally. And now if we shift our focus to a more recent chapter, but definitely a really painful one, we get to their take on the transatlantic slave trade and the impact that had on the Israelites.
Yeah.
This is obviously a really heavy topic.
Absolutely.
And one that still has a huge impact today. So how do they even begin to talk about this part of the story?
Well, they draw this direct connection between the curses that are talked about in Deuteronomy 28
Okay.
and the historical experiences of the Israelites, especially the transatlantic slave trade.
Right.
And they really emphasize like disobedience to God's law as a major factor in why they were enslaved.
But, I mean, we have to be careful here, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because that kind of interpretation could be twisted into something that justifies slavery.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. We can never forget how horrific slavery was, the level of oppression and exploitation. Nothing can excuse that. And the brutality and suffering that people went through. Nothing.
Exactly. So are they saying that the Israelites were punished for straying from God's path? Is that what they're getting at?
You could interpret it that way. They see those curses that are listed in Deuteronomy as consequences for disobedience. And they see those punishments play out in the historical experiences of the Israelites, including their enslavement.
That's a lot to carry, literally and figuratively.
It is. But there is a sense of hope in their interpretation.
Oh, okay, good. Like what?
Well, along with all that talk about curses, Deuteronomy 30, it also has this promise of redemption and restoration for the Israelites.
Okay. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Right. It's like a journey from darkness into light, from being captive to being set free.
And how do they see that redemption happening? Like, what would that look like?
Well, they believe that by coming back to God, by truly following his commandments, Israelites can break free from that cycle of curses and finally experience all the blessing that God promised them in the scriptures.
So it's a message of hope?
Of resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering.
Wow.
It definitely adds another layer to how they see Israelite history, you know?
It does.
With all that talk of curses and promises, it raises all these questions about suffering and divine justice and whether it's possible to heal from the traumas of the past.
It really does. And it reminds me that history, it's not just like a bunch of names and dates in a textbook, you know?
Yeah.
It's filled with human experiences, with beliefs, with interpretations. Like each generation tries to make sense of the past in their own way, right?
Yeah, trying to find meaning in all the things that have happened that have led up to their world.
Absolutely. Okay, so this has been incredible so far. We've unpacked all these interpretations. We're piecing together their unique view of Israelite history. And I got to ask, like, what do they see as the ultimate destination for the Israelites? Where does their story end up? Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive here, and I'm really curious to hear what these documents say about the ultimate destiny of the Israelites. You know, like we've traced their journey through all this hardship, from their beginnings in Africa to enslavement, the scattering, the loss of identity. Like, where does it all lead? Is there a vision of hope for them, a restoration of some kind?
There is. It's a vision that's really grounded in how they see God's covenant with the Israelites.
Okay.
They believe that, like, even with all the hardship they've been through, God's promises to them, they haven't gone away. And they're waiting for a time of redemption, a restoration.
That's a powerful message, especially when you consider just how much suffering and oppression they've faced throughout history. Like, what would that even look like, this redemption? I mean, how do they see it playing out?
Well, they envision a future where where Israelites return to God, like fully embrace his commandments and take on their role as his chosen people. And they believe that when that happens, when they come back to righteousness, that's when they'll experience all the blessings and favor that God promised them in the scriptures.
So it's like a return to their original purpose, that priest of God role that got disrupted when they were scattered all those years ago.
Exactly. They see a future where Israelites can reclaim a spiritual identity, and then they become like a beacon of light, for everyone else, guiding people toward righteousness.
It's a beautiful vision, a real testament to their faith, their belief in God's plan. But what does it mean for Israelites living today? Like, how do these ancient promises translate into, I don't know, into something real, into something tangible, into hope for the future?
Well, they put a lot of emphasis on education, on people waking up spiritually, and on building strong communities. They think that by studying the scriptures, by understanding their history, and by coming together, in unity, that's how Israelites can start to take back their heritage and start working towards fulfilling their destiny.
So it's about empowerment.
Yeah.
Giving individuals and whole communities the tools they need to embrace who they are and to work towards a future that's grounded in faith and in righteousness.
Exactly. They see this redemption as a collective effort. It's a journey that needs people to commit to both personal growth and to coming together as a community.
This deep dive, it's been really eye-opening, like unpacking all these interpretations and starting to understand their perspective on Israelite history. I mean, it's made me question a lot of things, but it's also helped me understand this whole story in a way I never did before. It's amazing how a story that spans like thousands of years can still feel so relevant today.
It is, and it's a good reminder that history isn't just stuck in the past. It's alive. It's a narrative that keeps shaping our world. It shapes how we see things now and how we think about the future.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our exploration today, I want to leave you, our listeners, with a question. Something to think about. After hearing all of this, after diving into this incredible history of the Israelites and their enduring hope for redemption, how does it make you think about your own journey, your own sense of identity, your own faith, your own purpose in the world?
It's a great question, one we should all ask ourselves. Maybe this deep dive will spark a curiosity in you to explore your own heritage, to dig deeper into your beliefs, or to find ways to connect with your community and build a better future together.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of Israelite history. We'll see you next time. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.